Please can I confirm that the live stream has started? Thank you. And if I could welcome everybody to this meeting of Herefordshire Health and Wellbeing Board being held on Monday, the 6th of December 21. For those present in the room, if the fire alarm should sound, please evacuate the building by the nearest exit and proceed to the assembly point in the car park. The agenda and papers and other relevant information for the meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on their YouTube channel, and therefore there will be a recording held of this session. To ensure that the recording quality is maintained, please could I ask that everybody speaks as clearly as possible and keeps background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that all mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meetings, provided that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please indicate that now so that any taking the filming is aware. Only board members present at the meeting may vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants, and can I request that they use the raise hand function within the system if they wish to contribute to the meeting. To ensure that those watching the live stream or recording know who you are, can I please ask that people introduce themselves when they are invited to speak during the meeting? So thank you very much. And from me, Dr. Tate, as your Deputy Chair, I really do welcome you. And those are the sort of formalities to start us off. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome Daryl Freeman as our new Director of Children's Services for Herefordshire Council. If we could move to agenda item 1, please, which is apologies for absence. Have any apologies been notified to the clerk?
Yes, Chair, thank you. So apologies have been received from board members, Councillor Pauline Crockett of Herefordshire Council, Christine Price of Herefordshire, Herefordshire, Chief Fire Officer Jonathan Price of Hereford Worcester Fire and Rescue Service, Dr. Mike Hearn of Taurus Healthcare, Neil Taylor of Herefordshire Council, Simon Trickett of Herefordshire Worcestershire Clinical Commissioning Group, and Superintendent Ed Williams of Westminster Police, and Mark Yates of the Herefordshire Worcestershire Health and Care NHS Trust, and Julie Grant of NHS England and NHS Improvement. Apologies have been received from Paul Walker, Chief Executive of Herefordshire Council.
Thank you very much, Ben. And moving on to any named substitutes that we've been given notification.
Thank you. I'll just stop for a second. I believe that I think Adebayo has got your hand up. Could I just check if your point, please? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. My name is Rosemary Adebola, Deputy Director of Strategy and Partnerships from Hereford and Worcestershire NHS Trust. Apologies from Sarah Dugan, Chief Executive, and apologies from Sue Harris, Deputy Director of Strategy and Partnerships.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And you're really welcome. Thank you very much.
Okay, so to move on to the other substitutes, then we have present in the room. We have Chief Inspector Ross Jones attending in person for Superintendent Ed Williams. So thank you, Chief Inspector. Also attending virtually as substitutes, we have Hazel Braun for Simon Trickett of Herefordshire and Worcestershire CCG, Richard Kelly for Christine Price of Health Watch, and as you said, in terms of the arrangements for the Health and Care NHS Trust. So as with everybody attending virtually, as Chair pointed out at the start, that they can obviously participate, but not vote thereon. And Heather Manning has her hand up as well. So if you could make your point, thank you.
Hi, Heather Manning here on behalf of Ellen Footman, from Herefordshire and Worcestershire CCG.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Any other attendance matters? No?
Not to my knowledge.
No, thank you very much. So if we move on to agenda item 3, which are declarations of interests. Do board members wish to declare any interest in the agenda items? I would remind people both if there are topics at the beginning of the discussion to raise them now that are of a general nature, or if there are items related to a particular item that either is formally recorded here or that inadvertently crops up as part of our discussions, then please declare it at the time. And the matter that I will start with a declaration that I'm a member of the Worcestershire Health and Wellbeing Board, which I would just like recorded, please. Thank you. So please raise hands or declare any other interest. I can't see anything else, so thank you very much. But if anything crops up later on, please do. We'll accept them at any moment. Thank you. If we then move on to agenda item 4, which is the minutes of our previous meeting held on the 26th of July. What I would like to ask, those minutes are included in the agenda pack as pages 9 to 16 for approval. Could I ask if there are any questions of accuracy? No, nothing raised, no hands raised, right. So no matters of accuracy have been confirmed at the meeting now, and nothing has been reported earlier to the monitoring officer. So I'll ask board members to confirm that they agree the minutes. So could I have all those in favour of the minutes please raise their hands, either in the room? Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
and I think that leaves no against and no abstentions, looking at the hands raised. So that deals with agenda item 4. Thank you. Agenda item 5 is questions from members of the public. Members of the public have had the opportunity to submit questions in writing to the board ahead of today's meeting. On this occasion, no questions have been received from members of the public. Can I double check that with you, Ben?
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you
this time.
Thank you very much. And straight on to agenda item 6, which are questions from councillors. Councillors have had the opportunity to submit questions in advance of the meeting as well. Again, on this occasion, no questions have been received from councillors. And could I just confirm that finally?
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we move on to agenda item 7, which is the Herefordshire Safeguarding Children Partnership Report to Herefordshire Health and Wellbeing Board concerning children and young people's mental health and suicide during 2020. The purpose of this item is to receive the report from the Herefordshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership at Appendix 1 to consider the report and provide comments with regard to the recommendations and request for assurance. Could I now invite Heather Manning from Herefordshire and Worcestershire CCG and Daryl Freeman, Director of Children and Young People's Services for Herefordshire Council, to introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Daryl Freeman, and as the Chair indicated in his introduction, I'm the recently appointed Corporate Director for Children and Young People at Herefordshire Council. As Corporate Director and also the Statutory Director of Children's Services, I represent one of the 3 statutory strategic safeguarding partners. This report, authored by Helen Footman on behalf of the Herefordshire Safeguarding Children Partnership, is to inform you of the Children and Young People's Mental Health in Herefordshire during COVID-19 report, and also the West Midlands Regional Themed Child Death Overview Panel report in relation to deaths by suicide and self-harm, April to May 21. The partnership highlights the increase in apparent suicides and self-harm deaths across Herefordshire and Worcestershire, and also the apparent shortage of Tier 4 beds nationally. The report came to our development workshop on 1st of November, so many of you have seen and discussed the content already. On that basis, I won't speak to the report itself, but will assume that it is read. My colleague Heather Manning is also present for this item, should you have specific questions about the subject matter that are outside of my own expertise. As for the recommendation, I would suggest that the wording in the report is perhaps ambiguous. So to clarify, you are being asked by the Herefordshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership to seek assurance that effective processes are in place to prevent further deaths by suicide and self-harm, and that the Health and Wellbeing Board seek assurance regarding the resilience of and access to mental health services locally. This is, of course, a Health and Wellbeing Board responsibility and not one for the safeguarding partners. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Darryl. I just at this point wanted to check whether there's anything that Heather would like to say.
Hi, nothing to add at this time. I wrote a report back in May for the safeguarding partners, and it's formed the basis of this report that Ellen has put into the Health and Wellbeing Board, as discussed by Darryl.
Thank you very much, Heather. And could I firstly just check with regard with the papers, as said, are taken as read. Are there any questions of fact that people want to ask about those papers before we perhaps give more consideration for the recommendations that Darryl has brought before us? No, thank you very much. Well, what certainly I saw, and I'll check with colleagues, was obviously a very important topic matter for discussion related to the mental health and well-being of our children and young people in Herefordshire. And as Darryl has gone on to say, how we gain assurance on the appropriate services and environment for their well-being and care in such circumstances as they need to enter the various levels of the health arena. Clearly, this topic has been discussed before when the report was presented and released at a development session. And I just wanted to check with my colleagues at this meeting how they wanted to approach it in terms of gaining that assurance. Where we got to, the membership of the meeting today is slightly different to the membership of the last meeting that considered this, but where we got to was that the Health and Wellbeing Board itself directly couldn't give assurance to itself, and therefore needed to have a mechanism within the existing work processes of children and young people's work stream across Herefordshire to seek assurance that would then be fed back to us, and then at that point decide whether we had the necessary assurance for the topic and the actions that were being taken to make sure that we were delivering the optimum environment and range of services to meet the needs of our children and young people's mental health and well-being. So my understanding is that we have a Children and Young People's Partnership Board, and that they are the Herefordshire body that takes on work of this nature, looking at how we work together to seek partnership working in terms of well-being and delivery of services and outcomes for our children and young people. I wanted to pause at this moment, but there would be perhaps a way in which we could seek their project work and assurance on this very important topic. So I want to test that out with other members of the group. So I'm sorry for hogging the discussion to start with, but it was because we had started a discussion on this topic already, which I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on. So I'll silence myself now and ask others how they would feel about the appropriate way of taking this forward, both in the room and on screen. Thank you. Councillor Hitchin.
Yeah, Chairman, thank you. I read this report. Probably have seen it before, but it raises, I think, considerable concerns. And I look at the recommendation, and I suppose I'm expecting to see some concrete steps or something like that that can actually be taken. And I think from your introduction, Chairman, your view is we need to seek other opinions and hopefully some sort of action plan that might come from the body that's more appropriate than us to look at it. So just, if I may, just go into the detail just in one aspect. Looking at the report from Heather Manning on page 8, I think 8 or 9 of that report, records an increase in self-harm, depression and mental health cases between March 2020 and then March 2021, quite an extraordinary increase. But then I was reading it, the following paragraph, I'm not sure, to me it doesn't follow. It says it is concerning that the number of CYP being referred to the school nursing service has decreased during COVID-19. The figures are obviously a huge increase. So why is it saying in the first sentence that it's a decrease? Presumably it's different factors into account. I wonder whether Heather Manning was able to comment on that.
Heather, could you help us with that point of clarification?
I suspect, I think the decrease in referrals to the school nursing service during COVID was when schools were not open for children, so therefore they were not being seen by the school nursing service in situ. My understanding currently is that those referrals have now increased. They're probably coming in from schools more so. But the last conversation I did have, there was some issues still with the school nurses being able to access children within school. If they were getting into schools, they weren't able to do drop-in clinics, which is what they used to do. And it seems that's what young people prefer. They like to know that the school nurse is on site for 2 hours and they can pop in and see her with a friend if necessary. And I believe that was being done on an appointment basis at that time, which doesn't work for young people. They don't want to book an appointment to see the school nurse. They want to call in and see the school nurse while she's in there.
And thank you very much, Heather. And I think that's a point well made, because often young people as an example, but many other people trying to access services need to have them in a way that makes sense to them. And I think clearly the drop-in service was very much valued by young people, and therefore hopefully in the slightly different world that we're now living with COVID, I accept it's still very difficult, but the opportunities for such slightly more flexible access would be supported as an alternative mechanism. But a great question from Councillor Hitchin. Thank you. Any other questions or comments about taking this forward, please? Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for requesting clarity, because sometimes I go to things and there are partnerships and boards requesting assurances from each other, and I'm not quite sure who's going to take things forward and who's reporting to who. And I think Darryl said something earlier regarding sort of amending the recommendations in the report.
Yes.
So could Darryl maybe repeat that, and we could see if we've got something clearer?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think it would help, Darryl, if you did repeat that, and then I may make a suggestion to add to it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the board is being asked by the Herefordshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership to seek assurance that effective processes are in place to prevent further deaths by suicide and self-harm, and that the Health and Wellbeing Board seek assurance regarding the resilience of and access to mental health services locally. That was the recommendation, hopefully clarified. And I just say, Chair, that in relation to the Children and Young People's Partnership, that partnership exists. It's been stood down for part of this year, but is kind of recently re-emerged and is potentially a board where an action could be tasked to provide an assurance report.
Thank you very much. So before I came up with one third recommendation, I just want to check if there were any other comments from people either in the room or on the screen contributing to that. And for example, there is Hazel Braun from the Herefordshire and Worcestershire CCG, and obviously we've got the Health and Care Trust represented and other partners, because it isn't just about the council and the commissioning world. This is a true partnership topic. So Hazel and Becky Howell-Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. Do we need to ask the Children and Young People's Partnership, given it was stood down for some time, and given that it is, I believe, doing some work to establish itself fully? Do we need, as a board, if we're placing a significant responsibility for a very important area onto that partnership, do we need to ask that partnership to tell us what they need to be able to deliver for us? It feels like a very big ask, and we as the partners around that table need to ensure that we're contributing as is required to enable them to respond.
Okay, and then Becky.
Thank you. I think it leads quite well on from Hazel's point. I was just going to comment on it is really important work, and to clarify the scope of it, because it is very large, isn't it? And not to lose, I think sometimes we would head down a service route, and obviously that is really clearly really important, but actually not to lose that prevention aspect in it as well. So I think leading on from Hazel's comment about actually, you know, what will they need to do, it actually clarification around the scope and what's the detail of that we would ask them to look into. But otherwise, it seems on the surface to me to be the sensible approach.
Okay, clearly it is an incredibly important, incredibly complex topic. In terms of Heather, on behalf of Ellen and others that wrote the report, are there particular things that aren't already in your existing report that you feel should be included in this, so that we're absolutely sure that we maximise the scope in a sensible way to allow delivery? Because it is about delivery, this, isn't it? Delivering assurance. We don't want to come up with something that has 200 headlines and we don't give assurance on any of them. We would much rather be very clear on the those areas that we want. So which are your bottom lines, Heather, in terms of the areas? I just wanted to make absolutely clear that Ellen and yourself and Darryl all feel that in those initial two recommendations that we've got this spot on.
So I think, you know, obviously COVID put a huge demand on the services, but also obviously on the mental health of children and young people as well. You know, it was sort of a double-edged sword, wasn't it? Absolutely. I think, you know, our local CAM service, you know, and the investment there has been really, really impressive. And I think, you know, gone over and above to make sure that the services are there for the children in the community when they've not been accessing school and not necessarily accessing GPs direct, have been in place. So, you know, really, really applause for that, I think, actually. So I think it's really looking at, you know, the suicides that we did have, which, you know, have not necessarily been entirely confirmed yet from a coroner's inquest perspective. I'm unsure of the dates of those currently, but, you know, we have to say at this time that they were suspected suicides during that time, and that COVID may have had an impact. And obviously what we want to do is prevent that happening to anybody else.
I'm not quite sure what's happening there, but anyway, before we try and tie this together, are there any other perspectives that we haven't gained? Any other hands that need to go up? So I'm taking it that yes.
Just a question, really. It's about resourcing of Herefordshire Safeguarding Challenge Partnership. It's not very well as policy practice. What resources do they have available? It's a totally open question because I just don't know the answer to that question.
I think that's a really helpful question, because that's exactly what I was going to say next. That was really helpful. So is there anybody who isn't in the room who should be for this group to have the best chance to deliver the objectives that we may be about to at least ask them to explore and give us assurance on? So I'm fairly clear now that all of the health partners are or should be in the room. I'm very clear that the safeguarding processes are in the room. I'm very clear that Herefordshire Council of Children's Services are in the room. I just need some assurance about other, I suppose, voluntary community sector, education and other partners who might be key to particularly to the wellbeing and the early identification of those that we're trying to pick up before they're at risk of becoming somebody in great need, or at the extreme, somebody who suffers a tragic loss that could have been preventable. So, any thoughts on partners who aren't in the room that would make this a more successful enterprise? Are there any members of the existing partnership, accepting that it isn't meeting regularly? Are there any people who can give us a perspective? Because I think the questions that have been raised are appropriate. Are there any partners that available now who could tell us who they think isn't in the room that really would be a key player. I see no hands raised, so I think we're going to have make a stab at this one, because I don't think we can do the complete design model in this room. I have to be quite honest. But what I think we need to start with the challenge that we've been set is that there are potentially 4 preventable deaths of young people that have happened in the year 2020. We don't know that they're confirmed suicide yet, but they're suspected. And we don't know that all could have been prevented, but we have to start with the assumption that they could have been. Building back from there, we've got recommendations to assure ourselves that we have a well-being and service offering that enables young people to access it, whether we have COVID or not, I think, because this need is not going to go away, whether we're in a COVID or a non-COVID world. So that bit seems key. And I think the third element of it, and I hope people are capturing this because I'm not sure I can say it again, is that it can only work as a team effort with a partnership approach, and that includes partners who are present at the table here, for example, our police colleagues and others who may also be aware of people who are in great need and how to both support and signpost depending on the level of need that they have. So I will have to seek Daryl and Hazel and other partners' feedback at this point, and Becky's feedback at this point, but I think we have to at least start on the premise that we have to give the opportunity to our existing structure in the Herefordshire Children and Young People's Partnership Board to approach this topic on the theme of well-being, service, prevention and outcomes as a topic to use the evidence that we have to examine the current offering and come back with a series of recommendations, and those recommendations could cover everything from partners who could or should be part of it that aren't. It needs to look at prevention in terms of maintaining well-being, early intervention, service offering, and extreme examples, including services that aren't available locally that maybe should be. So this isn't, I want to be quite clear, not an exercise in blame. This is an exercise in examining where we are, where we could be, and how we could structure ourselves to get there. So would that be an effective way? I can't put that into a recommendation. I'm sort of gulping because there is a short way of putting it, but maybe what I've just said, and I haven't seen anybody shaking their head yet, so I hope I'm all right, could be the narrative to support a recommendation, which I was going to ask, and I know why people were nervous about what I might ask, which is, could we ask the Children and Young People's Partnership Board to examine the topic to gain assurance on the health, well-being and service offering for our young people to maintain the optimum opportunity for mental health and well-being and safeguarding life, which was what I was going to put as a recommendation. I'm hoping somebody has captured that. Again, I'm not sure I can put it quite so succinctly if you ask me to do it again. So could I suggest then that we look at those 3 recommendations, the 2 from Daryl and the one that I've added in there, as the basis for taking this item forward, and the 4th recommendation would we bring it back in interim form for our next public meeting on the 28th of March 2022, and in final form for the next public meeting after that, which I am told should be in May 2022.
Early June.
Early June.
Yeah.
So it'll be so there'll be an interim report in just over 3 months and a final report in 6 months, if that makes sense. This is a key topic for exploration and action. This is very clear, action. So I see a hand raised. Please come in. Please introduce. Thank you.
It's Richard Kelly from Health Watch Herefordshire.
Thank you, Richard.
I think, like everybody, I'm sitting here struggling to think how something as important and as broad as this can be dealt with in a timely manner. The only thing that strikes me, in addition to the actions you've suggested, is that there is currently a NHS initiative called Working Better Together, which is specifically designed to look at problems, deep system problems, and to try and work out how integrated solutions can be brought to bear on that. I know that two of my VCS colleagues, including CLD, the Youth Counselling Organisation, have made a proposal to that fund. And I'm just wondering whether the weight of this board could be brought behind, not necessarily that particular initiative, although it might be the one, but to suggest that resources and people are brought together under the auspices of that to look at this specifically, because it strikes me that it's about resource and focus, not so much about ownership. It just struck me that would be a way of dealing with this more sensibly. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you very much, Richard, and that's very helpful. So maybe we could tweak the recommendation 3 to include opportunities to maximise the input from the voluntary sector through working better together initiatives where available, or something to that effect. You know what I mean? Because clearly it will involve the voluntary sector, the sort of work that we're talking about here. This is a true partnership topic. There's no one bit of no one of us can solve this problem on our own. I think that's very clear. But it's trying to, I suppose, get it into bite-sized chunks that are possible to deliver. So could I ask my colleagues to read those recommendations again? Have you managed to capture them, Ben or Jen, or just to go through them, just so we can check them before we...
Yeah, indeed. So I've been trying to combine elements of what you said.
Yes.
What was said at the start. So essentially, the Health and Wellbeing Board will be requesting that the Children and Young People's Partnership Board examine the following topics in order to obtain assurance in terms of effective processes being in place to prevent further deaths by suicide and self-harm, and there being resilience in terms of health and wellbeing services locally, including access to mental health services. Then the next part of it would be that system partners commit to a partnership approach in responding to any recommendations arising from that work, in terms of prevention and outcomes, including opportunities to maximise the input of voluntary third sector groups through working better together. And then finally, an update on progress be provided to the board at its next meeting in March 2022 with a final report in June 2022.
Okay, and those are in addition to the 2 recommendations that have been made by Darryl as well.
I wrapped up into the first part in terms of the effective
yes.
processes.
Yes.
So asking that the partnership board to explore the topics with a report back to the Health and Wellbeing Board.
Yes, but also I think there were 2 specific ones that Darryl gave right at the beginning, which were to seek assurance that effective processes to
in place to prevent further deaths by suicide and self-harm. Yes, I've incorporated that into the first one. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I think we've effectively morphed to 5 recommendations, 2 from Darryl and 3 that are a combination of our discussion, my suggestions, other people's suggestions, and then the valuable input from Richard. Could I start with that before we go on to formal proposing and seconding? Are people satisfied that captures the major elements of our discussion? Yeah. And anybody in the virtual world? Becky?
Thank you. I was just going to suggest that maybe we put, for example, through the Working Better Together, because there might be other routes for other roles.
Yes, yeah. Could we just book?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great.
Chair, can I
Yes.
just, we're potentially telling people who aren't here what they've got to do.
Yes.
My question, I suppose, in a way is, who is on the children's board that we referred to? Who's the kind of chairman who runs it? And I don't know whether anybody about that is.
Yeah. Let's see Daryl's. So that's a very valid point, which is why I did have a brief discussion with Daryl before the meeting, just to check the sorts of areas we might venture into. So could I look to people like who aren't in the room, for example, Daryl, Hazel Braund, the Health and Care Trust, and others, just to check that they feel that this is a workable set of proposals with the right partners in the timescale available, and not obviously it's going to be Becky. Hazel.
Yeah. Certainly, the membership of the group is a broad membership from health, social care, and a wide range of partners. I'm happy to take the action back to consult with members of this board and some of the people involved in an activity. So, and the Children and Young People's Partnership is chaired by the cabinet member for Children and Young People, and at the moment I'm the vice chair of that group.
Thank you very much, Daryl. And then Hazel.
Yes, I think that the recommendation is the right one, Chair. I think we just we need to ensure that the chair and the vice chair, so Daryl and Councillor, are able to come back to us rapidly if they feel that any partner needs to put more resources in or give more time to this. But I think the recommendations are absolutely the right ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hazel. So I'm now going to ask if there are proposers for the suite of recommendations that we made. They have to be in the room, I think is my understanding.
I'm happy to propose.
And seconder? Yes, thank you very much. And then if we could take a vote then. So those in favour of pursuing the recommendations, raise their hands. So I think that's unanimity with 0 against and 0 abstentions. But I do like the idea that Hazel Braund has raised, that there is early alerting if there's a problem with what has happened. So in the light of what Councillor Hitchin asked about the ability to work on this project and deliver, that any problems with that are reported urgently between meetings, and that it would be escalated before the meeting through whatever governance channels are available, both for the Health and Wellbeing Board and for all of our other partnership activities linked to children, that this matter wasn't lost between now and the 28th of March. This is a key topic. So I thank you very much for a discussion on the topic that is really important to well, 30 or 40,000 young people across our county, and if we can, by working together, deliver a better opportunity for health and early identification to avoid the most difficult and sometimes tragic outcomes, then that would be a very worthy process of coordination in terms of safeguarding our children and young people. So can I thank the safeguarding group for alerting us to this? Can I thank my colleagues for the quality of the discussion? And can I thank the colleagues from the Children and Young People Board who are taking this forward for their commitment to the work that we've discussed? So thank you very much. Okay. So if we then move on to agenda item 8, which is the county-wide approach to becoming a sustainable food place. I'll take it that people have read the papers. The purpose of this item is to inform and gain support from the Health and Wellbeing Board on a county-wide approach to becoming a sustainable food place, and on the food vision for Herefordshire developed by Herefordshire Food Alliance. Can I invite Kristen Pritchard, Health Improvement Practitioner for Herefordshire Council, and Pete Norton from Herefordshire Food Alliance to introduce the board, please. So over to you.
Hi, so I'm Kristen, a Health Improvement Practitioner in the Public Health team. Pete, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Pete Norton, coordinator of the Herefordshire Food Alliance on behalf of New Leaf Sustainable Development. Kristen, shall I carry on and talk to this presentation?
Yes, please.
Okay, well, thank you all, first of all, for giving us the opportunity to talk to you about the Sustainable Food Places project. As I said, I'm the coordinator of the Herefordshire Food Alliance, and the little strap line on this first slide does quite a good job of summarising what I'd like to talk to you about today. So we're looking to make healthy and sustainable food a defining characteristic of where we live. And by way of some background, if we move on to slide 2, thanks, Kristen. Back in the 2000s, we had quite an active cross-sector county food partnership working on what you might describe as a sustainable food agenda. We developed and wrote a county-wide food strategy, something that the National Food Strategy has very recently suggested that all areas develop. And we were the first in England back in 2011 when we published that report and that strategy. Around that time, as you will be well aware, it was about the time that austerity was kicking in. So a lot of the work that we did, the resources and capacity that had existed for that kind of strategic work fell away, which meant that we lost a lot of momentum, I would say. Quite a lot of that work did carry on, but it was more in sort of isolated pockets. So, for example, an offshoot group that set up from the food partnership was the Sustainable Food and Tourism Partnership, focused mostly on looking at what the food offer and linking that to tourism. And that was chaired by the Duchy of Cornwall, which you may or may not know is the largest landowner in the county. More recently, whilst working for Brightspace Foundation in 2018, Kristen and I got together and brought a number of partner organisations around the table to form the Herefordshire Food Poverty Alliance. And the purpose of that was to see how we could work together to tackle food poverty locally, which is an increasing issue, actually. This is when I first started working with Kristen and Rebecca Howell-Jones. And they've both been instrumental in this endeavour of looking at food in a more systemic way. It became clear when we started meeting as a food alliance, we created a map of food poverty risk across the county, which I believe was used during the COVID pandemic to help identify where people were at risk. But it became clear that we could look at food in a more strategic way and in a more systemic way, and we should broaden our scope. And it was those conversations that led to us forming the Herefordshire Food Alliance. So we amalgamated the work on food poverty with the Food and Tourism Partnership, plus other partners who were involved in different areas of the food system, such as looking at environmental impacts. If we move on to, where are we now? Oh, we're on 3 anyway, that's good. So we then formed the Herefordshire Food Alliance. The Food Alliance is a network of local stakeholders working together to implement the Sustainable Food Places model in the county. Now, I'll say a little bit more about what that is in a minute. We have cross-sector support and representation, and we're still growing. You can see on this slide here, there's a list of current members, and that membership is increasing, and people are gaining an interest in what we're doing and in this approach to food in the county. Can we go to the next slide, please? So our initial task was to create a local food system map. So that's to say, a big list actually of what we know that's going on that's really positive, that works towards a more sustainable food system, and areas for improvement, shall we say. So we've created that document, and we also asked the question, what would it look like if we had a more sustainable food system in the county? And we agreed a vision, which we've articulated here, and that's up on screen for you. Herefordshire has a thriving, healthy and environmentally benign local food economy, where those on low incomes and in rural areas have access to affordable, healthy food, where food production, processing and distribution systems contribute to landscape and wildlife diversity, minimize waste and consider the impacts of climate change, and where local communities are actively engaged in healthy living and have an increased understanding of the links between food and personal and planetary well-being. Can we have the next slide, please? And this is where the Sustainable Food Places framework comes in. So we decided as an alliance that we would adopt this national framework, which is a programme run by Sustain, the Soil Association and Food Matters. And they help cities and counties develop sustainable food systems in their areas. This gives us a framework to work within. And they set out 6 key issue areas, which are very similar to the key issues that we identified in our own food strategy 10 or so more years ago. And those, as well as the key issues, there is an award scheme. And the award scheme gives us something to work towards. So are we making improvements in all of these areas? And that leads us to gain bronze, silver or gold awards. The beacon areas for this system for these awards are Brighton and Bristol, both cities, not counties. Developing it at a county level is a more recent thing in terms of sustainable food places, but something that I think we're very good at in Herefordshire. So just briefly going through those key issues, taking a strategic and collaborative approach to good food governance, building public awareness, active food citizenship and a local good food movement, tackling food poverty, diet-related ill health and access to affordable healthy food, creating a vibrant, prosperous, diverse, sustainable food economy, transforming catering and food procurement and revitalizing local and sustainable supply chains, and tackling the climate and nature emergency through sustainable food and farming and an end to food waste. So it's pretty ambitious, but if we can make steps in each of those 6 key areas, it shows we're working in the right direction rather than in the wrong direction. And if you think of recent issues to do with media attention on pollution in the Wye, for example, that's just one example of something that we were looking at back in 2010, 2011, and that is still even more prominent issue now, and something that we can work together as a network to help address and to look at how we can make changes there. So we became members of Sustainable Food Places in June this year, and we received a grant from them, which was generously match funded by Public Health. And that funds me to coordinate this alliance for 2 days per week. And I work very closely with Kristen on that. If we move on to the next slide, please. So then you might ask, well, why do we want to do this? Why do we want to look at food in a strategic way, in an umbrella way, in a systemic way? Well, if you take the view that the 3 pillars of sustainable development are the environment, economy, and social and health issues, then it becomes clear that food is a very important player. It occupies a central role in all 3 of those things, in my view. It's the biggest manufacturing sector listed by DEFRA, and even more important in a rural county like ours. Health and well-being, obviously very massively influenced by food choices, food culture, and our food system, i.e. how we grow, process, distribute, package and waste food, has an enormous environmental impact. So all 3 of those areas are central. Food is central in all of that development. So as an example, projects in these areas, under environment, you could look at tackling food waste and food surplus issues, sourcing locally from shorter supply chains, supporting and promoting environment-friendly farming, which I just mentioned, reducing pollution, and also distribution and packaging and waste. 75% of household waste bins is food and food packaging, so it's huge. Economically, local food promotion, we talked about as part of tourism, is really important. Food festivals, for an example. The cider trail is an important one around here. Developing, or at least not losing, the food infrastructure that we have. So that's been an issue over the last 10, 20 years, losing important food infrastructure where food producers can add value. So whether that's anything from abattoirs to yogurt making to sausage making, whatever it might be. That infrastructure, once it's gone, it's much harder to get back. And of course, getting a bigger share of the overall food spend to local producers, because the majority of it goes out of county to large multiple retailers. Also, getting local food into the public sector markets, such as schools and hospitals, would be an important economic and possibly local health benefit. In terms of health, I'm going to hand over to Kristen to talk about health. She's much more qualified than I am in that regard. So Kristen, over to you for a minute.
So in addition to what Pete said, I think there's some great examples of local food related health work. For example, our healthy lifestyle trainers who focus on supporting healthy lifestyles and healthy diets, as well as an organisation called Growing Local, who deliver a lot of food educational projects. They also support the health aspect. In addition to that, this model supports our whole system approach to tackling overweight and obesity in the county through various routes, whether that's healthy eating or the educational aspect. It can certainly support with our whole system approach. We have poor rural health in the county. Again, this model can be used to support tackling some of that and supporting healthier diets. Pete has already mentioned the increase in food insecurity, certainly since COVID as well. And again, this model has a huge focus on the food poverty, food insecurity aspect. And again, I think through COVID, it has been identified that there's been an increase in loneliness and isolation, and things like cooking clubs and those educational type programs are really great at tackling loneliness and isolation, not only in the older population, but I think in the younger populations too. I'll go on to the next slide, Pete. So there's some really strong strategic links which the Food Alliance has. So the Food Alliance is performing a really important networking, information sharing and supporting role amongst not only its members, but other colleagues, linking and enhancing various existing activities in the county, as well as incubating the development of new projects and initiatives. So it is playing a really, really important role at the moment. Nationally, there's the food strategy. Now that the Sustainable Food Places model really aligns with all of the recommendations within that. The model aligns with our county plan, as Pete has just explained, with the environment, community and economy pillars. It's strongly aligned with Herefordshire Zero Carbon Plan. So there's a specific key issue or section which focuses on food waste and reducing that. We've had various conversations with Talk Community and actually how we support each other and can work together. There's alignment with the NHS long-term plan. We're also in conversation with our planning colleagues around the development of the new local plan and core strategy, and actually what health policies can support some of that. And then we're just working across various public, voluntary and business sectors, all to make sure that we include a focus on sustainable food. I'll let you update Pete on that slide.
Sorry, I was muted there. Key actions to date then. So it's just an example of what we've been up to and where we've got to. We've created a food system map looking at areas of focus across those 6 key issue areas. We've agreed a food vision and short-term action plan. We're aware the food vision is a wordy thing. And that's something that we're working to at the Food Alliance ourselves. But we're also developing a food charter, which is something that would be much more outward and public facing. And I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. We participated in a national research study, food responses to COVID, working with Sheffield University and King's College London, to see how resilient local areas were when COVID hit in terms of food supply chains and access to food. We've helped to network the county food banks together and encourage them to share data with each other and with us. We've held meetings about public procurement, both with school food providers and with facilities management at the hospitals. Meetings have been held with the waste team, and a project proposal put forward for a food waste collection pilot scheme, as well as how to tackle food surplus issues. So just a distinction there between what's food waste and what's food surplus. Discussions have taken place with planners regarding local plan development, because this is also an issue to do with access to food where developments take place, and also access potentially to growing space. We developed a plan for of food surplus redistribution and education hub. That's one of our members working on that. An increase in membership and engagement. We've made an application to become a member of Sustainable Food Places, which was successful. As I've said, we are now members, which means we can work towards one of those awards. And it also meant that we were eligible to apply for grant funding, which we received. And we're working with the network and with people in very similar positions elsewhere. So we're working with Cornwall, Devon, West Northamptonshire, all working on a similar systems approach to food to see how things can be improved and put on a more sustainable footing. And our priorities for this year, which I think is the next slide, developing a food hub. So this is to do with a logistics operation to tackle food surplus and get food surplus out to those who need it most. This happens in the county, but it's a very ad hoc thing at the moment. So we're trying to create a more coordinated way of doing that. We want to develop a food charter which people could sign up to. Different organisations, individuals, businesses can all sign up to and get behind. So a set of criteria, if you like, that we can all agree. And we want to engage more with local food producers and processors. So although we have representation on the board, on the Alliance Steering Group, we could do with a little bit more from the food business sector. And the following year, because we have a 2-year plan, we're 6 months into it, we want to develop a food strategy as we had before. And the thing is, we could just write one. But we want to make sure that we do this by process of engagement so that it becomes something that's meaningful and that people feel they have some sense of ownership. And we want to work on public sector procurement issues. Can we get more local food into the public sector? And can we influence those supply chains? And we're aiming to get our bronze award status by the end of 2023. So our request is that the Health and Wellbeing Board support the work of the Herefordshire Food Alliance in principle, initially. Obviously, your influence strategically with your own networks, with people that you work with the organisations that you work with, will be invaluable to pushing forward this agenda. It's those connections that are important, but in particular, when the charter is developed, we're asking for your support for that. And obviously that I'm asking you for something that hasn't been written yet. But in principle, again, supporting the Herefordshire Food Charter and signing up to it. There's one other thing that I don't know whether it made it onto the final report or not. But so often we look at what we say are healthy food guidelines, and we have an obligation to issue healthy food guidelines, public health, and the NHS issue the Eat Well plate. And what about healthy and sustainable food guidelines? Because the principles are very similar, and what we find over and again is that a healthier diet is often a more sustainable diet. So those guidelines could be brought together and they could be of benefit, much wider then. So those are the requests. And thank you very much for your time and for listening and for taking the time to see what we're up to. I don't know whether Becky wants to say anything more or Kristen, but that's it from me. So if you have any questions or any comments or anything else you'd like to know, then please fire away.
I can't see Becky coming in, so just a huge thank you to Kristen and Pete for raising such an important health topic, because I totally agree that you know, in jargon terms, we are what we eat. Therefore, having a healthy diet is a key part of maintaining health rather than illness model. So thank you. So just throwing that wider before we come back to recommendations, are there any questions, comments, or feedback that members either in the room or online would like to make? Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you very much. I'm really pleased about this initiative, and that we're a member of the Sustainable Food Places now, so that we can really learn from other places. And of course, on the council, we've signed up to the Preston model, which also links in with local procurement, so there's huge potential there. So thanks very much. It's a real win-win-win potential here. I've got my one little caveat, which is the way we talk about food poverty. I'm slightly worried about that phrase because I think it can be incompatible with how we work with our farmers and our local food producers, because it can imply that food's too expensive, which, you know, I'm very wary about that. I think people who are struggling financially, bills are horrendously high, rent is very high, public transport is high, pay is low, welfare schemes are punitive, job contracts are precarious. I think there are all sorts of reasons that people are really struggling financially, but that making food cheaper isn't necessarily the answer. It doesn't mean that we're going to get healthier food or support our local food producers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I was looking at the list of participants. I'm pleased to see the local NFU have been involved. My question really is about food producers other than the NFU. So we have a lot of businesses in the county which are producing fantastic food. I'm not aware of any one organisation that holds it all together. I'm just wondering your observations on that, because there is a huge opportunity in Herefordshire to gain from this kind of healthy food marketing, and greener and fairer county we talk about, and processing the food within the county is an awful lot better than sending it somewhere else to be processed. So I'm just interested in your reflections, if you've got any, on engaging with food producers.
Shall I come back on that, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please do, please do.
Yeah, so well, thanks for the previous comment as well about food poverty. If I just briefly come back on that as well, that is a discussion we've had about how one describes that, and perhaps household food insecurity is a better way of describing it, because it certainly isn't about necessarily making food cheaper. Often when we look at this, you know, we used to spend not that long ago a third of our income on average on food, and now it's a fifth. So food is, you know, cheaper than it was, and we have this expectation of cheap food. However, those issues you raised about poverty in general and access to food are contribute to household food insecurity. Doesn't mean that we want everyone to produce cheaper food, certainly not. And in terms of your comment about farmers and producers, yes, we have NFU representation, which actually is unusual on an alliance like ours, which sounds mad, doesn't it? Because we're talking about food production here, but a lot of the other areas are finding it difficult to engage, because sometimes when you're talking about food citizenship, there's perhaps a conflict with the food economy, potentially. So we have NFU representation. We also have representation from Farm Herefordshire, which is another great local organisation working on improving environmental standards for farmers. And we're also working with Visit Herefordshire, with their very much engaged with local producers about that, celebrating local food, you know, which is a big important thing here. We've identified that there's a few different kind of categories, if you like. The big producers will carry on being big producers, and they'll carry on selling to supermarkets, and they'll do it the way they're doing it. The micro producers have their own kind of micro markets, from farmers markets, direct box schemes, that kind of thing. There's an area in the middle, there's a gap where one grows from being a micro producer or from being a direct producer to being a processor, where we think there's an area for support, and potentially we can support people there if we find the right scheme. So working with other organisations like the Herefordshire Rural Hub, who are connected into a lot of local producers. So this is something we do have experience of. We need to work more with those people and find out more what their needs are, but it's certainly an area that we intend to work more with. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thanks very much. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Tutt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the risk management of it, and it states about community partners organisations working together. I think that's one of the worst issues for Herefordshire. It's like people working together, and I'm just wondering what sort of opportunities will there be if there's sort of gaps in that delivery? Who else would step up to it? Is there sort of a mechanism in place that we could fill that gap? I'm just not sure who would sort of do that in terms of the partnership working, especially with resources and funding as well, because that's always a particular issue from carrying on with any sort of initiative.
Any thoughts on that one, Peter or Kristen?
Shall I come back on that, Kristen? Yeah. Yeah, there is a potential risk there. We had a period where I had some funding to manage the Food Poverty Alliance, and that fell away. And there was a gap, and then there was COVID, of course, as well. And in the interim, Kristen and Becky stepped in and carried on with organising and keeping that network together. There's no formal, we're not a formally constituted group at this point. So it is an informal network. So we would rely on other people within that network to pick up the mantle, if you like. Going forward, if we become formally constituted, then we'll put measures in place, obviously, to cope with any of those issues. We're funded now for the next 18 months, and we'll do what we can within that time to create enough momentum behind what we're doing so that people support it, see that it's valuable, and put resource behind it. That's probably as much as I can say on it at the moment.
Thanks very much. Any other questions, feedback? No? Anybody in the virtual world? No. And just to give you some reassurance from the NHS perspective that actually sustainability is a key plank in the NHS as well. It's probably initially coming in a carbon direction. So I chair the system Greener NHS Delivery Board, and we're particularly focused on the carbon footprint of some medications, inhalers and other drug products that have a very significant carbon footprint. And obviously buildings and transport and clinical practice and all other sorts of areas are being looked at. But clearly we recognise immediately as part of that work that, for example, air pollution and other bits have a tremendous impact on health. And this is another plank of that in terms of, and I noticed that you're talking about approaching providers in terms of the the locally sourced nutrition and other bits. So with the NHS, there definitely are opportunities of recognising that sustainability is a key part of all of our lives and is a key component of our overall health and well-being, not just the illness model. So just to give you some reassurance that it isn't solely a local government issue, is recognised by the wider public sector. So thank you. So if we could go to the formal bit of the business then. So we've recommended that the Health and Wellbeing Board supports the work on sustainable food places in Herefordshire, including the local vision, aims and actions set out in the plan. Health and Wellbeing Board member organisations actively promote and engage in activity across the Sustainable Food Places framework, including the Food Charter. Does the board wish to make any further recommendations at this time? No, that captures it. So thank you very much. And obviously we'd like to see certainly sight of the updated food chart when it appears. So I guess that's work in progress from what I'm hearing. So on that basis, please can I have a proposer and seconder for the recommendations as read? Thank you very much, that's Tyler. Thank you very much. And please can we now go to a vote? People could please raise their hands if they are for the recommendations. Right, that's unanimous. So thank you very much. So 0 against and 0 abstain. And could I again thank Kristen and Pete for this really valuable work that you're doing on an important topic for overall, not just Herefordshire in a narrow sense, but actually I think everybody's health and well-being. So thank you.
Thank you.
If we then move on to agenda item 9, which is the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment 2021. The purpose of this item is to approve the summary of the 2021 Joint Strategic Needs Assessment for Herefordshire. Could I invite Charlotte Worthy, Intelligence Unit Team Leader, Herefordshire Council, and Becky Howell-Jones, Acting Director of Public Health, to introduce the report, please. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you've got me to start with, and then I'll hand over to Charlotte. But as just outlined, so the main purpose is to bring the key findings of the 2021 Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, the JSNA, to the board for approval. That's the first recommendation in the covering paper. And as members will be well aware, the JSNA is an ongoing assessment around the current and future healthcare and general wellbeing needs of the population. So there's wellbeing in the widest sense. And it really is there to provide an evidence base to inform our priorities of the board in addressing the causes of poor health and wellbeing. And again, that sort of focus on reducing inequalities and to highlight where they are and how we can address them. So the Herefordshire's JSNA is actually a continuous JSNA. It's our live evidence base in the form of the Understanding Herefordshire website. But the agreement previously was that we would do this three-yearly summary to provide an opportunity to take stock on what we currently know. I think it's particularly timely, given everything that's happened, obviously, to look at it now and to reflect on the wider impacts of COVID as they've emerged through the pandemic and the immediate, obviously, the impacts of all the lockdown and the measures to address the pandemic. The JSNA is coordinated by the Intelligence Unit, led by Charlotte, and she's. I'll hand over to her now, and she'll talk a little bit more about the actual paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Hello, everyone. Just to mention that my colleague Dave Helm, who did loads of the legwork behind what we're presenting to you today, is also with us to answer any specific questions if they come up later. So members of the board will already be familiar with the structure of the JSNA's key findings, which are presented on page 61 of the agenda pack, and also the overall key themes on page 63. They were discussed in the workshop in private at the beginning of November and were circulated sort of around and have been discussed since then. So I won't dwell on those at all. The main messages presented on pages 64 to 66 are the same as they were then as well. Just a few minor wording changes for clarity based on some of the feedback we've had and further engagement that's gone on since that workshop. What is new since the workshop are the more detailed section summaries, which start on page 74 of that overall pack. And then also some further work to really emphasise the importance of the interconnections of risk factors and vulnerabilities and the impact that the right early help and intervention can have both on individuals' lives and also resources across the whole system. So that's covered on page 73 as a kind of a summary of that sort of topic, and then also in a little bit more detail in the safeguarding the most vulnerable section, which is page 82. Then also reflecting the other sort of golden thread that's running through the whole JSNA, page 70 brings together some of the inequalities that span all topics into a sort of visual spider diagram where we've just highlighted some of those key inequalities. Then moving on to the second and third recommendations in the covering paper, these ask the board to agree to consider the findings of the JSNA in the development of priorities and future health and wellbeing strategies, and for board members to facilitate the dissemination and use of the JSNA within their own organisations and other system networks. And we'd really welcome your thoughts on those today. And then finally, also to draw your attention to our recommendations for the next steps in the continuous process of Herefordshire's JSNA. So what we believe, based on the conversations that we've had with subject matter experts and the gathering of the intelligence that we've done over these last few months, are the next priorities for the topic-based analysis for the JSNA, and ask you whether they feel right for the whole system. Those are detailed in recommendation 4 of the covering paper, and also have their own page in the JSNA key findings, which is page 64 of that appendix. And just to dwell on those a little bit, so they include 3 sort of specific pieces of work, which actually probably tie in quite nicely with the 2 previous agenda items that you've been discussing today. So firstly, our continued understanding of the wider impacts of COVID, as we continue, as information and data continues to emerge about the longer term impacts on the wider determinants of health and well-being of COVID. And then also drawing together the different data on mental health and well-being to build a system-wide understanding of need and demand for mental health services in the county. And thirdly, commissioning specialist research into the drivers of Herefordshire's low productivity. So that's something that it always features as a key statistic, that Herefordshire is relatively low in terms of those economic measures of low productivity, but it's not really clear why that is. It's sort of often linked to the low wage economy, but that doesn't necessarily give us a full picture, we don't think. And then also three areas that are a bit more nebulous that we feel need exploration to identify how we can best fill those existing gaps across the whole system. Excuse me, because it may be that there is already existing insight and evidence that we just haven't been able to link into yet. So those are around vulnerabilities, safeguarding and community safety, the impact of environmental changes, and also what poverty and financial insecurity actually look like in Herefordshire. So trying to pull together some of those disparate pieces of information and turn them into a coherent story. And I'll stop there and hand over to you for any questions or discussion.
Thank you very much. The Whistle Stop Tour was obviously a huge amount of work, and thank you to everybody involved in that. So thank you, Charlotte and Becky. So throwing that open then, any questions? I mean, obviously it's enormous. It is an enormous topic, and many of the actions you're asking of us are more in a leadership context, but support taking this forward. Are there any questions of substance or on approach that people want to raise at this point? I wanted to ask, while we're waiting, I just want to ask one what might appear to be a thick question, and it may be very thick, so I'm quite prepared to accept it. But if food is regarded as such a low economic value that however much effort you put into it, you wouldn't be able to realise much economic value, does there come a point where productivity becomes meaningless I suppose it's almost about where the power lies in a market, I suppose. Yeah. So I'm not an expert, but there must come a point where a market is so small that you could work 10 times harder and actually never add any value, because actually you're continuously assumed to be able to always produce something 5% more efficiency, and therefore it is a race to the bottom. And that is a deliberately pointed question I'm raising at this point, because I don't know the answer, but it just struck me it might link a couple of the earlier conversations. Yeah. Because we are, I think, the highest proportion of our economy based on food and agriculture of any county, certainly in England. I hesitate to venture into Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland, but I think in English terms, we are, as a percentage of our economy, probably still larger than anywhere else. Right. Has anybody got a view on that, or am I just making a thick comment?
I think that's exactly why we need this. We need some specialist research to understand what is actually driving these low measures, and kind of get a better understanding of what productivity really means. Because everything being pinned on that single figure of GVA does hide all of these sorts of complexities. So absolutely.
My other thick question is, which probably won't fill many stomachs, but is the question on, I think, it's not Sikkim, but it's one of the Himalayan countries that has gross national happiness as their measure of wealth, rather than a crude measure of GDP. And the only reason I raise that is that I did hear a very interesting discussion recently from somebody who was one of the designers of GDP, who said that his original tool was being misused viciously, and he was very angry about it because he didn't bring it in for the use which is now given to it. It was quite interesting when you meet the architects on the topic, and they talk about something that they said wasn't brought in for the reason it's now used, which is fascinating, because I had no idea it was actually brought in for something totally different. So, so quite interesting. When you go back to the original research on the topic from the person who researched it. Fascinating. Anyway, it looks like I've probably stunned you with that. I'm sorry.
Bhutan.
Bhutan, you're right. Thank you. You rescued me. It's next door to Sikkim, Bhutan. But yeah, anyway. Jane, welcome.
Hi,
lots of things at your end, so we fully understand if you're having to rush in and out.
Yeah, I'll pop in that a bit. So a couple of things. One is I think that productivity, and actually Rebecca and I had a previous email conversation. I went for a long walk with my daughter who's did a master's in economics, and couldn't get my head around it, and I don't think I still understand it. But I think it's understandable. I'm not sure that we need specific research for us. I think it is understandable from people who are trained in economics and the rest of it, but it is complex, you say. It's not just not a single measure. The thing I was really interested in was this it's on page 40 of 60 of mine because it's separated out. It was that healthy life expectancy for men, which feels like it's gone down by 5 years in the last 5 years, which seemed to me to be a bit of a worry.
Can you help us, Charlotte and Becky, on that one?
Yes, I can't. I haven't got the exact slide in front of me, Jane, but it does look. Yeah, there has been a drop. It's really difficult. The confidence intervals are very wide on the healthy life expectancy and the disability-free life expectancy measures. So not necessarily an absolute measure of a 5-year reduction, but yeah, we are really highlighting that certainly for males in Herefordshire, the life expectancy measures, so overall life expectancy and healthy and disability free, no longer are significantly, this is a really weird way of saying it, sorry, they previously Herefordshire has been significantly better than the rest of England, but for males there is no longer that significant difference. So male life and healthy life expectancy has kind of fallen off and is now closer to the national average.
Yeah, but I guess it was the change, because life expectancy has continued to go slightly up, broadly in line with the national averages, although closer now than it was. But healthy life expectancy has actually dropped. And I recognise there's big confidence intervals, but it does look like 5 years of going down. And just wondering if we knew what that might be about.
I think that's a really important topic for Health and Wellbeing Board, because the potential for that to impact in terms of the need for services rather than maintaining people's health is actually critical for the raison d'etre for having a group like this that is based on wellbeing and early intervention. So I think it's a key question. So absolutely a hot one. So as a question then, to take James' comments on, because I think they're really valid, is there a specific piece of work that needs to look at that, either to say that it's a mathematical fluke that actually can be entirely explained by the statistics, and actually it could be completely different in 3 years' time because of bad luck, or i.e. random numbers, or that this is something really meaningful because we don't want it to continue. We would rather actually have a female gap of the same gap that the male gap was in terms of improvement going back a few years ago. I.e. we should be levelling up men and women, not levelling down at this moment. Probably a blunt way of explaining it. Think about that one, Becky. Richard's coming in.
Yes, Chair. I can't remember the exact source, but I have seen data that confirms that healthy life expectancy for men is decreasing, mainly because of alcohol consumption, and also, again, because of the obesity thing. You know, the generation that had low protein diets during the war are dying off. And people like me tucking into Mars bars throughout the 60s mean that we don't live as healthily for as long as our predecessors. It's upset by the fact that we don't smoke. I have seen reports to suggest that that's what's happening across the UK. So that may be part of it, but it's all conjecture because nobody measures enough things to really predict it accurately. Thank you.
Any thoughts, Becky or Charlotte?
Yeah, I think, well, they're all really important questions, aren't they? Because you're absolutely right. It's that in terms of for individuals and ourselves, and also actually, you know, for the system, that healthy life expectancy and that sort of health, that sort of period which is in ill health are really important. It's not going to give a clear answer, but what we will do in terms of there'll be supplementary data that goes behind these slides on the website, and we'll make sure that we pull this out a little bit more and understand that. But I think, you know, it's just been mentioned some of the real drivers around these this, you know, we know some of those drivers around the ill health that people are experiencing, and whether that, you know, whether that comes through CBD or whatever it comes through, look around that smoking, healthy lifestyles and different aspects that can lead to those inequalities. So sorry, that's not a clear answer, but there will be further. We'll make sure that we circulate that around board members as well.
The only point I can chip in is something that I came across yesterday, but I was being reminded of something I already knew, was that parts of Sardinia are a World Health Organization blue zone because they have 10 times the number of people living to a healthy age of 100. So it's quite an interesting one. They're mainly people who lived an agrarian peasant shepherd environment with daily exercise, interesting enough, a low sugar, low fat, high vegetable, you know, average protein diet, and have sort of quietly got on with things. And it's really interesting, but it's actually, there are examples in the WHO of 5 places in the world that are classed blue zones because their healthy life expectancy is so much wider than the average across the world.
And a strong sense of community.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. A strong sense of community. I belong. Yeah, it's always that gives the mental drivers that stop you doing perhaps the behaviours that might put you under stress and drinking more alcohol and other bits. So it didn't say no alcohol, but it was definitely not extreme alcohol. It was, you know, a glass of wine a day was the 105-year-old who was still attending his allotment on the programme. You know what I mean? He had a glass of red wine a day, but he didn't have a bottle. It was very interesting. You know what I mean? Anyway, flippant, but we're on to our recommendations. I don't see any more hands raised. I think this is a really key bit of work, and actually there's a couple of really meaty areas to get into there, both economically through the productivity and also in terms of why we've lost our cherished status of better than average life expectancy. So those are 2 really important meaty topics. So we'll send you away to research on that, and we definitely want to know the feedback. So you've challenged us enormously, so thank you. So I'm probably not going to read out the entire recommendations, otherwise you'll be completely fed up with my voice. So I'm going to say that we have recommendations A, B, C, D, and D includes a number of subsections as listed. Are there any additional recommendations that anybody would like to make? I think we should somewhere, perhaps, I don't know where it was recommended, but pick up Jane's point, I think is really important. So does that need to be listed as a recommendation to do some work on why we've lost our healthy male life expectancy? I don't mind either way. Or will it just happen, Becky?
Sorry, get off mute. I don't mind either way, actually. We will definitely do it in the background, but if it would be helpful to have it as a recommendation so it's there and written down and comes back to.
Is that a recommendation 5 to, and just something very brief, to explore why Herefordshire appears to have lost its advantage in terms of healthy male life expectancy? I think that's the shortest number of words I can put. Would you be happy with that, Jane? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, and I'm just searching for the recommendation actually, and failing to find it. So sorry about that. I'm in the appendix where I can't find the recommendation. I guess my reflection would be, it's sort of not rocket science and stuff, is it? We absolutely know the evidence that creates healthy outcomes. You say it's do what they do in Sicily broadly is the evidence base. What we're not good at is changing behaviour. Finding strategies that really do change behaviour. So I'm not quite sure what the recommendation is. Sorry, I was just looking for it. But that almost needs to be what we're doing. So what are the things that we're going to do to try and support people to change behaviour? And is it more than we're doing now? It suggests certainly for men that it does need to be something more and different from what we're doing now, because it isn't working. I mean, women broadly look like they're flat, but for men it looks like it's going down. So it feels like we need to do something different.
Okay, so agenda 5 then is to explore the apparent deterioration in enhanced male life expectancy, seek examples of the opportunity, seek the evidence base for the best evidence-based opportunities for intervention to reverse that trend. I think that's probably the shortest number I can do it, Jane. Is that good enough in terms of delivery?
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if we go for A, B, C, and a tweaked D with a subsection B, as discussed, are we happy then to move on to a vote? Well, A, to move on to a proposer and a seconder. We look around the same page, so proposer, Councillor Hitchener, and seconder, Councillor Tyler. And if we could go to a vote by raising hands for the recommendations, unanimous, so 0 for, against, and abstain. So thank you very much, Jackie and Charlotte. And that's got an important debate going, which I think will add value for the future. So thank you. We then move on to agenda item 10, which is Herefordshire and Worcestershire mental health and wellbeing strategy, which obviously in part links to several of the above that we've discussed. The purpose of this item is to review and endorse the draft Herefordshire and Worcestershire mental health strategy. Can I invite John Burgess, Senior Commissioning Officer for Herefordshire Council, and Jack Lyons Wainwright from Herefordshire Worcestershire CCG to introduce the report, please. So over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, they're not quite with us yet. They're just joining.
In fact, it'll be myself, Ewan Archibald, and Jack Wainwright. So I think Jack is still joining, but I am here.
Thank you, Ewan. Welcome. Is Jack with us now?
Not that I can see, Chair, but I. Well, I can certainly start by way of introduction, and Jack was going to provide a bit more detail and help answer questions. So I can do that, but would very much hope that Jack joins before I've finished, because he is the expert on this particular document. But thank you very much. Good afternoon. So this that you have before you is a mental health strategy for Herefordshire and Worcestershire to cover the whole of the ICS area and the whole of the partnership. It's an overarching strategy around mental health. It is all age in focus and focused not only on NHS and commissioned services, but all of the whole suite of services and issues from prevention through to treatment of complex needs. The development of the strategy has been driven by a number of factors, including the development of the NHS long-term plan, but is also intended to be a response to local needs and challenges as they have emerged over periods of years. The strategy is a product of significant and extensive engagement, particularly during 2020, by both the CCG and the Mental Health Trust, starting at the time with Together NHS Trust, the then commission provider, and taken over by the Herefordshire and Worcestershire Health and Care Trust. And there's some excellent extensive work being done as part of that engagement, despite some disruption caused by COVID. But CCG and Trust have continued to engage during 2021 with a range of partners to further develop the shape and depth of the document which you are presented with today. Obviously, the strategy is prepared against the backdrop of some significant context, and just to mention a couple of those elements that are particularly important. One, we're obviously in a continuing process of the transformation of community mental health services for working age adults, which is a key development locally, where we've been at one of a number of pilot areas nationally, and have benefited from significant investment of resources from the NHS in those developments, which are still unfolding. We're obviously on the brink of new integrated care arrangements, including a new mental health collaborative within the wider ICS across the system and locally. We're obviously still dealing with the consequences and the implications for mental health and the delivery of mental health services of COVID-19. And of course, we're also in the context of wider developments, of which there are many, but perhaps amongst the most significant is Talk Community in Herefordshire, and work upstream and in a preventative way around the well-being of local citizens, including their mental well-being. And finally, I would say that much of the actions within the strategy that you will see towards the back of the presentation are, of course, you will gather already in train and already being delivered in many instances. But of course, there is a longer range delivery over the life of the strategy. I see that Jack has joined to my release, so I will pause there and allow Jack to add any more detail and then help answer any questions. Thank you.
Welcome, Jack, and Ewan has done a brief overarching introduction, but over to you to bring in any points that you think you particularly would want to make, and also obviously an opportunity for questions and discussion after that. Thank you.
Thank you both, and thank you, Ewan, for doing an excellent introduction for me. I was told to keep it brief, so I'll keep it incredibly brief now. But just as Ewan said, it's been going on quite some time, this strategy, really, since 2019. You've got the shortened version in front of you, which pulls out the key elements, really, the pillars. What I was going to draw attention to, really, and on slide 3 of the shortened document, the pyramid of need, really, and this strategy is about trying to pull resource down to that kind of more informal community care, self-care, and primary care level where possible. And I think some of the, although it's it can feel a little NHS led, this strategy, and obviously it's been produced by myself as an NHS employee. It is very much trying to bring resources to the well-being space as well. So although there is a lot of NHS delivery in here, it is hopefully trying to achieve many of the shared goals across council and NHS as well. And I think I'm sure Ewan said, but I probably missed this bit. We are seeking sign-off of the strategy as a system. I don't know if you've covered the scope of it, but so just to clarify, it's an all-age strategy for mental health. It obviously links to many other strategies. Think of homelessness, think of substance misuse, think of dementia. Where it is not explicitly addressing those issues, is where they have specific strategies in place already. But obviously lots of interconnecting issues with many strategies that are already in place, which are noted in the document as well. And the intention is for strategy to be a 6-year strategy. You see there's a 3-year plan within it. Under that will sit a much more detailed plan, which will be held by the Mental Health Collaborative Executive, as it's named, and that will deliver that group and the Mental Health Collaborative. And I suppose in the new world of ICS, the Herefordshire and Worcestershire Health and Care Trust, as the hosts for that collaborative, will be primarily responsible for delivery of that. But then for the second 3 years, we anticipate more engagement work to be undertaken and a revised plan, both in terms of local need and in terms of the second stage of the National NHS Long-Term Plan. And I will very happily open up for questions at that point.
So thanks very much to Jack and Ewan for stepping in at short notice. Are there any questions or comments on what obviously is a topic of enormous importance? In fact, we as you weren't here earlier, we spent a lot of time earlier on talking about mental health and well-being and adverse outcomes in young people. So obviously this is all age and both counted. So any questions, feedback or comments? No hands raised. Councillor Tyler.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very in-depth report. Thank you very much, Ewan. My particular concern is how GPs refer you to mental health sort of areas for help, because from my experience, I had a very poor time getting support for my mental health. And I'm just wondering where is the key flags to the GPs reaching out to the support services and how they all link together. That's my particular concern. And how would that be integrated into these core partners? And has the GPs got enough resource to be able to do that? Because there is a waiting list when you want to be referred to counsellors.
You coming back on that one, Jack? Thank you.
Yes, very happy to. I suppose I'm obviously very sorry you had a poor experience with that. I think there are some difficulties at the moment. We are in a slightly transitionary phase with the new model for community mental health. In Herefordshire, we've gone from kind of a mental health clinicians in practices and referral through there, or via a single point of access in other parts of the ICS. And then COVID has struck us, and some of those resources have been removed from practices. In terms of the actual referrals now, within Herefordshire, from a GP, there is a triage process for all community mental health referrals in. That is the current process. So that could be for IAPT or Healthy Minds. It could be for secondary care mental health services. It could be for, or it could be for our voluntary sector partners who work as part of that transformation framework. The intention is to develop that further, so the GPs are able to directly refer into say voluntary sector partners rather than going necessarily through mental health practitioners within the trust. So that's the kind of development that is going on right now. On your point about waiting lists, absolutely, that has been an issue in Healthy Minds in particular. The plan at the moment is that there is an ongoing cycle of national investment around increasing the number of people going through IAP services. And this has been a challenge from a workforce perspective and from an operational perspective. There is a recovery plan in place now, focusing very much on quality of service. So outcomes, recovery outcomes, and waiting times. So, and actually that kind of chasing that access target is seen as a secondary. It doesn't mean people can't go and people should absolutely be referred there, but rather than chasing a number of people who should be referred, who may or may not always even need that particular intervention, there's a focus very much on the quality and waiting times and recovery. So, and there is a look as well with our, and this is coming from our mental health medical leadership forum, which is our clinical directors for our PCNs with a particular interest in mental health, and they're driving this around, well, if we've got workforce difficulties within Healthy Minds, as in we can't recruit a full cohort, how can we use that resource to offer an alternative service through that may not be an IAPT Healthy Minds strictly speaking service, but something different but it can be much more responsive and takes that pressure off the IAPT service. So that is the plan for that waiting list. And I think that access point between the two items, you've got the community mental health transformation, where really you're trying to open up services to a much wider group of people, for what are traditionally secondary care services. And then you've got the Healthy Minds IAPT side, where we want to broaden that offer as well. That's just things that might not be strictly speaking what we call IAPT now. IAPT is a very fixed and rigid model, and try to offer more services there. So I'm hopeful that that is the plan to address those issues, which I think would address the issues you've raised.
Thanks very much, Jack.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Thornby, I think the jockey.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, obviously, I'm particularly interested in the children and young people's elements of this strategy. And referring back to item 7, as you said, Chair, that we talked about earlier. It's really important that I sometimes get impatient with strategies and transformation and everything. And so I can assure this board that I will be pushing forward on actual frontline, who's doing what at the front line, you know, CAMS, CLD, mental health teams in schools, have they got the resources they need? You know, let's ask the straightforward questions about that. And let's make sure that ICS actually works for Herefordshire, because I think we're going to have to keep a very close eye on that because of the political agenda behind it. And just 2 very brief points which relate to the Equality Act and our Equality Impact Assessments. In Appendix 2, I see that we're recording the sex of respondents, which is really important. But we've got male and female down as identities, which they're not identities. So please can we correct that and make sure that they're recorded as sex as under the Equality Act, so that our data is accurate. And in Appendix 3, just another point of clarification really. It says mental health issues are a recognised disability. That's not strictly true. Mental health is, you know, that has a specific meaning in the Equality Act. So we've got to specify that it's only if those issues and problems have a substantial effect on how people's lives are lived. Thank you.
You coming back on those, Jack?
I only say I'm very happy to make those amendments. That's not a trouble at all. And on the CYP access issue, thankfully, children and young peoples have a specific investment level, so that's protected, which I think is very positive as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor.
Yeah, my question and comment was along the same sort of lines. It was about children, and I'm aware that children are more and more aware of mental health issues themselves. So you know, within classes, I think it's a more talked about subject amongst children, and it's something which they are raising. So maybe there are more issues out there will come out because they're more aware of it. I think that's a very healthy thing that's happening. But linked to that in a way is partnership working. So I think as a county, we need to be working harder and harder to be in partnership, to see ourselves as together in this issue, as the same way as any issue relating to children. It's about partnership. So it's working with the schools, it's working with the teachers, it's working with the police, it's working with everybody. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on that, because I wouldn't want this to be too ICS focused. It's about partnership, working with everybody, which, as I say, we might be doing in lots of different ways.
I completely agree with you. And you're right, it's not everything's at ICS level. And that's been one of the real challenges of this strategy is to really find it a home in place. I obviously work typically at ICS, so it's been a move to make sure it works for place as well. On partnerships within children and young people in particular, absolutely, 100% agree with you. I think those are getting there. I think they're improving in many ways. I think about schools and the academies and things, and the mental health support teams in schools project, which is referenced in one of the slides. I haven't got the number exactly of the page at the moment, but that is a great example of health services working across schools and building those relationships, because I don't think they were that strong before. On your point about children talk about mental health more in school, absolutely brilliant, and actually schools are the right people often to be working with the children or referring into more specialist services when needed. Certainly we have a lot of patients who might go to their GP for a referral, and it's very health based and potentially medical centric, where it might not always need to be. But on top of that, the schools probably know the child better than the GP in most instances. So I think in that respect, we are moving in the right direction. And in a more general way, obviously, I think from a personal perspective, I feel I work pretty closely with John. Certainly, he's always getting bothered by me, and I think that is going in the right direction. And things like community first as projects and things trying to work working the right ways for that, and the voluntary partners as well. I think it's going the right direction.
Thank you.
Hopefully you'll agree.
I think it's really welcome that there is the emphasis on place, not only system, because and actually at a much smaller level, it will be at community and market town or parish or whatever. So it's the full spectrum of levels, and I think that's the key message. It's a flexible response, working with partners and collaborating for what makes sense to people and their communities. I wondered if any of our virtual colleagues wanted to chip in, because I realise it can get a bit room focused. So please do dip in, Hazel or Ruth or whoever. Anybody else want to come in? No? No hands raised. Okay. Well, I think we'll move on then to the recommendations. It is recommended that the Health and Wellbeing Board endorse the draft Herefordshire and Worcestershire mental health strategy and determine any recommendations it wishes to make to the council or relevant health bodies to improve the provision of mental health services for Herefordshire. Does the board wish to make any further recommendations at this time in the light of our discussion? No? Okay. Can I have a proposer and seconder for our recommendation? Councillor Hitchener proposing. Yes, Councillor Tyler, thank you very much. And could board members now please raise their hand if they are for the recommendations? Unanimous, none against, and no abstentions. Thank you very much. And thank you to Jack and Ewan for all the work that report sort of fronts, because there's a lot more going on in the background to get to this point. So much appreciated, and thank you. The next one is agenda item 11, which is the Herefordshire's Better Care Fund and Integration Plan for 2021-22. The purpose of the item is to approve Herefordshire's Better Care Fund plan for that time period. Can I invite Ewan Archibald to introduce the report, please? So over to you, Ewan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll give a very brief introduction, then ask Adrian Griffiths, our Joint Finance Lead, to summarise the key elements of the BCF documents very briefly, and then again to help with any questions. So this is the plan for 21-22 in accordance with the unusual but typical timings and timescales for the BCF process. We only received the planning requirements for this financial year, basically for the 1st of October this year, and had a very short period in which to prepare and submit the detailed plans and documentation for this period. So, as is often the case, unfortunately, those have been submitted, and so we are reporting and presenting them to you slightly after the event, which is unavoidable given the way that the Department of Health conducts this process. But by way of summary, I can confirm that the key national conditions and metrics have been met satisfactorily for Herefordshire. The Herefordshire Council continues to work very closely in partner with CCG in fulfilling those conditions and metrics and ensuring that our shared strategic objectives around integrated services are fulfilled. So we're continuing this year with many strong integration initiatives that have been in place for some time. We continue to build upon those, and there is within those obviously a sustained focus on managing and smoothing and effective hospital discharge. However, in this plan, there's an additional and some more innovative focus on seeking new ways of reducing and avoiding hospital admissions. So working at both ends of the challenge and the system to a greater extent, and we're inviting proposals and considering proposals now for innovative approaches to avoiding hospital admissions. And that's about it, really. By way of summary and introduction, clearly the spend across BCF and IBCF is spread across a number of pools. And if you would like to review the kind of detail of that, I'm sure Adrian will help. So I'll pass over to Adrian now for a little more detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Ewan. Yeah, so Ewan's covered most of the main points in why we're presenting the plan now and why we couldn't come earlier, and it's not ideal because it would be better to discuss it before it was submitted. I can say it was submitted on time for the approval process. We haven't yet had any feedback, but I'm not expecting it until just before Christmas if we're lucky. Nonetheless, we do need Health and Wellbeing Board to approve the plan. That is one of the requirements to have a jointly agreed plan. So it's very important that you're happy with it. The overall plan is just over £23 million within the Better Care Fund, 23.174 million. It supports core social care and community healthcare services in Herefordshire, particularly around discharge facilitation or hospital discharge. And it supports some fairly significant services. About £6 million of it supports the community health services provided by Wye Valley Trust. Another just over £2 million supports the Home First reablement service. It also supports operational social care, discharge to assess, integrated discharge teams, and some of the more complex social care teams. So it is a funding stream that covers the crucial services where health and social care join up with each other. I won't take you through all the detail within the plan. I think it's better to move on to questions, because if I started to describe the detail of all the various schemes and streams and metrics within it, we'd be here until next Christmas, and I'm sure you don't want that. So I think it's better to go to specific questions that anyone might have, as all the detail in the documents have been shared. But otherwise, I'll just start to bore you to death, I'm sure.
Thanks very much to Ewan and Adrian. So I'll move straight on to questions, comments, feedback. Keep around the room. See none. On screen. Not seeing anything, not missing anything. Again, that represents a huge amount of work on behalf of our population happening outside the room, and on the board's behalf, thank everybody involved in doing this work. It's clearly keeping this money in Herefordshire and using it for the purposes intended is making a difference to real people's lives. So I think that's really important. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say that a huge amount of money involved here, and to have a conversation in 5 minutes just doesn't give it justice whatsoever. But I did ask more questions last year.
Yes.
So hopefully, I got a degree of assurance then.
Yes.
And it's just a fantastic thing that just keeps going and going and going, producing value, doing what's needed for the community. It's hopefully continues to be without problems. And it's an example of partnership working between the council and the NHS. And I just commend it to everybody. It just seems to work fantastic well. And I do think we're getting great value for money out of it. So well done to all involved. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I echo that? Because to be quite honest, people sit at the interface between organisations, and it's activities like this that actually paper over the cracks between organisations and make sure that actually you get a coherent service. So actually it's very easy to underestimate the importance of doing activities like this. That's why I wanted to say thank you, because I think it is really important for real people's lives. So thank you for your comments, Councillor Richmond. Did you want to come in, Paul?
Yeah, just thank you for your kind comments, Rita. Just to congratulate the team on another successful BCF plan for this year. And I think that what Herefordshire and Worcester enjoy, and particularly in Herefordshire with the relationship with the CCG, is the joint finance post. The fact that we have a finance officer that is working for both organisations jointly brings a huge advantage and means the BCF process is incredibly collaborative, and that isn't always the same in all systems. That's to be appreciated, and that's definitely a position we should support and continue with, because it brings a huge amount of advantage to our system.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any other questions or comments before I move to the recommendations? Thank you very, very much. So it's
ready to say to Adrian, I hope that puts him in a reasonably comfortable position. You're presumably you're not sat on the fence. in a painful position, you're straddling it in some way, so comfortably ahead. And,
keep smiling. Yeah.
Keep smiling. Thank you.
Sorry, who's coming in? Amy, coming in, please.
Hi, sorry, just a quick question from me. Obviously been involved with it for many years, but I was just wondering if there's been any music around moving this more from a back end of the system integration to more of the front end in terms of prevention. I know there was discussions previous around actually how the BCF could be looking to more of the front end of the system rather than the discharges, etc. If there was any news on that, update on that.
Yes, this year's plan introduces admission prevention with a metric that maybe isn't quite the right one, but it's an attempt, and also does try to not shift the focus away from discharges towards admission prevention, but to add admission prevention as a focus for BCF, which, as you say, Amy, has been a ambition of the National Better Care team for a while. It's very low key at the moment because of the delay in getting the guidance out. I mean, when you issue guidance in October, you can't ask systems for radical change. But yes, the direction of travel is for upstream intervention and preventing admissions to acute beds to be more of a part of a BCF rather than just focusing on discharge, which I think can only be a good thing because, as you say, if it focuses on discharge, then that's very much at the end of someone's journey. Whereas if you can do things that stop them going to hospital in the first place, that's so much the better for everyone.
Perhaps if you'll indulge me coming off the fence as your chair, to move into my other day job as a GP, but actually I think that's very welcome, and I know many families would really welcome the opportunity for supported sometimes at completely different points of their journey through life. So I think again our theme today has been on well-being, but where it isn't well-being, it's early intervention and prevention, and therefore this would be a coherent strand with the whole nature of the discussion that we've been considering over the past couple of hours. So I think a great question, Amy, so thank you very much. And I think sometimes these things get forgotten in this is the way it's done, but actually I think occasionally rattling the cage and seeing if it can be, the boundaries and rules can be tested to make sense of the place is a really helpful thing for people in place. So thank you for a great intervention. Thank you. I can't see any other hands raised, so I think we'll come on to the recommendation then. And this is that the Herefordshire Better Care Fund Narrative Plan and Planning Template 2021-22 as seen at Appendix 2 be approved by the Health and Wellbeing Board. Does the board wish to make any further recommendations at this time? I see no. And then I think we're probably fed up with this, but could I just ask for proposers and seconders for I think the last time? Right, I think we'll go Councillor Tyler as the proposer and Councillor Hitchner seconder. Thank you for bearing with it. And I'll now ask for a vote or by hand. All in favour, raise their hands. I think we have unanimity, so 0 against and 0 abstain. So that brings us to the end of the formal part of our agenda. And I thank you for your forbearance in the previous business, but I think it has been a valuable exercise crossing all ages, all of the boundaries between wellbeing, physical and mental health, and very much with I would hope demonstrating that the best interests of our citizens and staff and users and carers is at the heart of all that we're doing, and as ever a ruthless focus on using the information and evidence we have to make a difference. I think that's the key focus. So thank you very much for all of you who've participated in today's agenda. So it remains for me to just discuss the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled for Monday, the 28th of March 2022. And I say thank you for your contributions, and also to wish you all a within the limits of the strange world that we're still inhabiting, wishing you all the best for Christmas and 2022 and the collaborative and collegiate style of working, which I hope will continue both at place and system as we move on into the next stages of our journey. So thank you to you all. Okay, so I'll close the board meeting in public at this point. Yeah, sorry, is that the live stream being closed? Yeah.